Hey guys, we are back looking at Yrel once again for a Why the Pros Play. Now, I've made a lot of Yrel videos with a wide variety of Yrel players, including Liam, who's currently on the opposing team this game. Yrel is always a tricky one to make these videos for because while her playstyles are still relatively the same, a lot of players are well known for Yrel, and so it can be tricky because people like to compare them to those players. Stronger being a player that I used in the past, showing Yrel and how to gain huge leads as far as the macro style of Yrel by double soaking and denying people double soak, where Liam was one of the better team fight Yrels. We're going to be currently looking at Kure. And the reason that I wanted to look at Kure in this situation is because I find he's very good at understanding what Yrel needs to do during team fights. Kure is on Simplicity. Simplicity is the team that won the previous CCL season, and now they are looking pretty strong in the current CCL season. So this is a CCL match, and Kure is playing Yrel. The early portion of the game, we're going to see how Kure approaches these fights and how Kure adjusts as the games go on. Early game, Kure ends up just playing Yrel for what she is, a high-value hero that can take fights rather slow, and the longer the fight goes on, the more utility he brings to the fight, or she brings to the fight anyways. And so level 1, he takes Dauntless. We've seen this talent be taken a lot. It was very popular for Liam to take this talent. Even with its nerfs, it's still a very strong talent that's used quite a bit. So the first thing that Kure does is he likes to send this wave over here. This means that this wave is going to crash, and if the enemies are not there to react to this wave, then they lose a lot of experience. Then he looks for other areas where he can gain value. He'll sometimes assist his team in camps. He never does camps alone as Yrel. He'll sometimes assist his team in camps, or he'll sometimes look to see if he can't flank and use his W to potentially lead to something for his team. He doesn't like to leave in the direction that you would normally see people leave. He actually likes to leave by going over walls so that he can jump back over a wall. And it's something kind of unique to what Kure does, where I think most Yrels would just run this way. He wants to try to avoid a common path and come up with an uncommon path to escape. I really chose this game because I felt like this game showed a lot of different adjustments to the playstyle of Yrel, as this game is a rather long one, but it does have a lot of really interesting things about this game. So early game, he's using a camp that he helped his team get. He's also making it to where he's just keeping himself safe when clearing this. He does take Hand of Freedom at level 4. This is generally used as an escape by most Yrel players, primarily used to just keep them out. Once he gets control over the top shrine, he tries to jump down to look for an opportunity against Rexxar. Because while Misha is trying to grab this point back, if he can threaten Rexxar, then he won't need to worry about Misha trying to grab the point back. He utilizes this camp that he helped get in the beginning after clearing the opposing camp and uses it to get the front walls. Now he can threaten Rexxar even more so. And Rexxar has a very small area where he's safe because there's fewer turrets to hide behind. He holds the point for a little bit, but he stays in the lower half so that he can jump down and quickly clear up if he needs to, or he can quickly just try to do some damage to the bear. Technically, Yrel loses this matchup, which is part of the reason why Brightwing is assisting in this. Because in the early portions of the game, Brightwing can always rejoin the team if needed by using her Z, and he still needs to destroy these front walls if he wants to be able to threaten Rexxar. So the Brightwing stays, which is not something that you're always going to be able to get. Yrel is someone who generally shouldn't be able to beat a Rexxar in the early portions of the lane. It gets a little bit easier post level 7 when you get some mobility options to jump more onto the Rexxar and fight the Misha a little bit less. Often anyways. So right here you can see he's not trying to engage onto the Rexxar. And that's because he can't do anything to the Rexxar. If he starts walking towards the Rexxar walks into keep range or fort range. And he can't fight under the fort. And so the only thing that he can really do here is try to keep Rexxar far enough away that the Misha will get leashed if the Misha tries to grab this point. The other thing that he can do is he can try to create a wave of minions that will help deal some damage to Rexxar. But overall, he knows his limitations, and one of the major reasons that he knows his limitations is because Kure is one of the best Rexar players in North America. So he knows exactly what he needs to do to deal with Rexar, and he knows exactly what he needs to do to apply pressure and when he can actually roam and when he can't roam. He can't roam right now because if he leaves, the enemy team will control both shrines and will have priority in basically every lane of the map. So he can't leave. But he's also a little low on mana, and he knows he can't fight. So all he can do is pressure and force the Rexar to leash the Misha, so Misha can't grab the point. So he knows that Misha's just sitting in this, and right as the bear's here, he has to make a quick decision. Does he fight the bear, or does he try to push Rexar away? In this case, he's destroyed the front walls, and he's making the call to his team that he wants to kill this Rexar. And so now we're going to see him start playing just a little bit differently when he can finally pressure this Rexar and lead to a kill. We see him taking Righteous Momentum. Righteous Momentum is kind of a slight difference from what we've been seeing in the past and what I've done videos for in the past. What Righteous Momentum does, and I apologize, I'm getting a tad bit of lag here. What Righteous Momentum does is it allows you to engage with just having your hammer going, and it forces the enemies to react to you rather than having you always have to use your trait on your W. Now you can save your trait to catch back up to the target after you've stunned them, or you can use your trait on a Q to give yourself some healing and extra damage. And so both of these situations are great, and it's just kind of become something that is a standard among a lot of Yrel players in the competitive environment. If you're playing Yrel outside of the competitive environment, I would recommend Holy Avenger just a tad bit more, because it gives you a little bit more power in yourself, where you can reset your E and get more damage off, where Righteous Momentum is more of a team-based thing, because you're forcing the enemies to react. Keep in mind, Kure is one of the better players for making adaptations based off of the game and the situation that he's in. So this is something that he probably is looking at the enemy team going, okay, well, if I'm charging my hammer, then it's going to force the enemies to use the stuns on me. So he starts off, and again, he's just peeling. And he did the same thing that he's been doing this whole time. He lets his wave go out and crash against the enemy structures, and then he goes and gets value elsewhere. The only time that he wasn't leaving to go get value elsewhere was when he couldn't give up the top point because he didn't control the bottom point. Once his team controlled the bottom point, he can go and he can roam, he can double soak, he can bully people, he can lead to extra kills, he can get value in a wide range of ways because he's not too concerned about just the objective. When the enemies start applying more pressure down in the bottom lane, he needs to make sure that he controls this again. He is using the Righteous Momentum so he can quickly move around the map. As you can see, he can go and just bully if he needs to, but he is having just a little bit of mana problems, so he will have to use his trait a lot more often, and he'll have to make sure that he's not wasting really anything. In this case, he uses his W to stay kind of in a great position to prevent the Rexar from getting away. They have two people here, but not necessarily enough damage to lead to a kill, especially since he's already used his stun, as well as his team has already used their stuns. So he just kind of uses it more of a distraction and then backs off after the cocoon was used defensively. He takes Argent Defender, and now he needs to decide if he's going to grab a fountain, which he does, or if he wanted to back to get that full mana. You usually grab a fountain if you have something that you want to do right away, where you'll just back and have your fountain for later if you weren't expecting to do anything right away. I think he thought he was going to get some value mid lane, and he didn't end up getting any value mid lane, so he just went back top. But he would have had time to get back to lane. But sometimes you still need to at least try. I think that's the biggest thing here, is a lot of times people like to watch a replay and tear apart everything with hindsight, watching, oh, well, you see, you could have backed here instead and then kept your fountain. But hindsight's 20/20. Sometimes you got to grab that fountain, try for a play, and even if it doesn't work, it was still an okay call. And that's one of those situations. I think that call was definitely worth it to try for. So in this case, he's just going to try to clear up this wave, keep control over top as long as possible. Whenever you're clearing a wave as Yrel, it's a lot more common to use your trait on your Q and then just use your E to get back into the wave. And the reason why is because your E doesn't need to be fully charged. The damage always stays the same. Charging only increases its range. A fully charged Q is really valuable, but you don't want to be sitting in lane charging Q for a long time. So you don't need to fully charge E, and you don't need to fully charge Q because you're going to be trait Qing. And the reason that you don't do a trait W on a wave is because you spread things out, making it harder to use your Q to get the most value. So you can save your Q to peel for your team, you can save your Q to save yourself, and you can use your E and your Q for damage to clear up camps, waves, anything like that. You can see he's staying within the spell armor for the most part while he's clearing these waves. And his team has control over the point, and so he's going to continue holding this control. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because we've talked a lot about the early game, and the early game is all about holding control, knowing what you can handle, knowing what you can't handle, and trying to get value in other lanes. You clear your lane, you look for some opportunities, whether that's double soaking or just for fights, and then you start adapting. That's the early game. I want to fast forward through the early and mid game so we can see a little bit more of the late game playstyle on Yrel. So the build is not uncommon. We've seen this build in the past. We go Velen's Chosen so we get that extra damage. We take the W so that you can force those CCs on you. And then everyone's throwing all their abilities at you and you can use Ardent Defender to survive that if needed. One thing that he does a little bit differently from a lot of other people, just so you guys know, he'll sometimes push the front line into the back line. And then he'll use his trait Q and his E, and his E will hit everything, and his Q will hit everything. You don't need to do that, but that is something so you can get just a little bit more damage on the front line. So again, this is mid-game. Mid-game is very similar to early game on Yrel. You're generally just looking for value, pushing out lanes, and while your lane's pushed out, you're just looking to help your team a little bit. But we've seen that playstyle as it's basically the same as the early game playstyle. I'm going to continue fast forwarding until we get to the late game. Late game is when the playstyle shifts, and I don't want you guys to be here for too long, and so we will be fast forwarding through a lot of this. He does tank a lot of structures because he does have that extra 35 physical armor, which makes it a little bit easier for him to tank structures. It's something that we've also seen from both Liam and Stronger. And again, continuing to fast forward through a lot of this because it's all the same that we've seen before. Now, once we hit 16, we've reached what I like to consider late game. Late game for me is 16 to 20, where 20 is, of course, like very late game. 16, he takes Templar's Verdict. This is a very strong talent for the competitive environment, and honestly, a pretty safe talent to pick in almost any game that you're going to be taking Yrel. It gives you percent health damage and armor reduction that you do not need to fully charge. You can instantly pop 7% of someone's health, so it could be a great finisher on a target that's very low health, or it could be a great setup to where you send targets into your team, taking a percent of their health, and also reducing their armor so your team can pop those targets very quickly. Because he's on a team that is more poke-oriented and less follow-up oriented, he's going to have to adapt his playstyle. He can't go the playstyle that I've trained before and I've showed before, where you jump in the back line, you knock the front line to your team, and then you distract the back line while your team kills the front line. Chromie and Junkrat are not going to be the fastest at clearing that front line, and this is where all this lead that he created is going to be kind of difficult to continue to force because his team comp can't really follow up on neither the Anubarak nor the Yrel because they don't have that guaranteed follow-up damage on the target that they want to focus on. And so this is where this game is going to get a little bit tricky. He held a lot of control over the early portion of the game and kept a lot of value for his team, but this is where it's going to get very difficult to lead to the rest of these kills. He can go in and he can be really annoying, but it's as far as their team forcing fights on their terms, leading to kills on their terms, it's going to be difficult. So you're going to see he mostly uses his W as damage. He literally is just walking up, pushing the enemies away, giving his team more time to deal damage to the keep, and also just to get that extra 7% damage, and he is fully charging it, so he's getting quite a bit of extra damage with it as well. 244 damage, 7% of their health, and then he's knocking them into structures. The knocking them into structures doesn't really increase any damage or anything. But you can see that's how he's approaching a lot of these fights, is he's just using it for damage and giving his poke team more time to poke. And this is one thing that I really like about Kure's playstyle, is that he adjusts. the standard Yrel playstyle that we see all the time of jumping the back line, pushing the front line forward, he's using it opposite. He's jumping in, knocking everyone back, and giving his poke more time to poke. And I think it's a really interesting adaptation for this hero. He's playing it more like an ETC would peel for his team than a Yrel would generally go for damage. So in this case, he's playing as a tank. He's anchoring the bush so his team can safely get this. And he has now adjusted his playstyle to be a peel tank where the Anubarak will engage and he will peel. And it's a really interesting adaptation for Yrel. And it brings up a lot of points about why the pros play Yrel. Is not only is she still a pretty strong bully, but she also just brings a very adaptable playstyle. You can distract the enemy backline, or you can simply peel for your team. And this adaptable playstyle makes her really nice in the competitive environment because it really allows you to get what you need for your team. So if you're unsure and you need a lane bully, but you don't really know what else you need yet, Yrel is a great option. And that is why she's being picked up by the pros. Even still, with the current bruiser meta where it is, where there's so many really strong bruisers, like Rexar, Diva, Hogger, even after the nerfs is still very strong. Sonya. The solo lane matchups, not matchups, but solo lane meta is very competitive right now. So where Yrel used to be something to just throw in here and there without really any concern, you need to have a lot more reasons to draft Yrel. Than just, hey, she's a nice lane bully, let's just pick Yrel. You're going to need just a little bit more thought into that, and I think that's exactly what Simplicity was looking for. They wanted a lane bully, they wanted someone who could peel, and they wanted someone who could adapt based on the situation because they just didn't really know what they were going to need and what they have. So he goes in here for a flank, and again, a standard Yrel play would go in and flank from the side and then push people into the team, and they would look for kills. He might not do that here because, again, if he pushes Varian too close to his team, that Varian lands a taunt on Lutano, leads to a kill. So in this case, they don't do that. They don't jump in and push Varian into the team. Instead, Kure jumps to the side to scare them and then has his trade available to peel for his team. It's really interesting to see how he's more focused on keeping his team alive and being annoying than he is to leading the kills. So we'll continue fast forwarding a little bit as we approach level 20. They're going to play very defensive until level 20, where the opposing team's going to try to force a fight. You can see Liam jumping from one target to the next, trying to force a fight. Right here, this time he ends up leading to one kill. And his goal was, I mean, it was a great time trap by the Chromie, but he positioned to where he can knock the target into his team. He's using his W to just get up to the target, since he can run 20% faster than the target. And he decides to give up on that when his team has already led to the kills that they need, and they're going to go for the Dragonite. So he's going to head up top. He does take Seraphim at level 20. To be honest, Seraphim is the best option, but for people initially learning Yrel, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get use out of Seraphim. Liam had a great method for teaching people how to use Seraphim, and he basically said every time that you're charging your E, as you're about to jump, just pop Seraphim so you don't get interrupted. And he said that's like the easy way to start practicing Seraphim, but definitely it's something that you guys are going to need to adapt and get better at. Think of it this way. Medallion was such a good thing for such a powerful tool when it had a 5-minute cooldown or a 500-second cooldown. I think it was 5-minute cooldown. Now imagine that you have a medallion on a 2-second or on a 10-second cooldown that lasts twice as long as medallion. It's really good. And so keep that in mind, that this is an amazing talent and it's worth practicing and getting good at, especially since your upgraded ult is not that good. If this like reflected damage back, it would be taken like every time. But the fact that all it does is does AoE healing makes it a little bit less valuable. And it increases the amount of healing that you get back. So in this case, he does do a standard Yrel play, jumps in there, knocks him back. But overall, it's just because he doesn't really have much to do here. Bop's unstoppable, so he can't get CC'd by the Rexar. And now he's just basically knocking back the enemies, trying not to knock back just Misha. He unstoppable the Uther stun there. And so this is kind of where this playstyle gets also even more interesting. He's using his W to force the enemies to use CC on him, and then he's unstoppabling right before the enemies use the CC, and then stunning them anyways. And again, it's a cool adaptation compared to the standard using your trait to stop them from interrupting an ability. He's instead using the unstoppable to force them into using an ability and then breaking that. So right here, once again, he's going to peel and just be a front line for his team. You can see Masquerade's even staying in the back line, holding his abilities back so he's not peeling. He's saving his abilities for engaging. And that is basically why the pros are playing Yrel these days. I think the Simplicity's draft is really good, but I think my only concern is I think their draft would be so much better on a map where by stalling an objective would cause you to win the objective. Where in their current sense, they have a really hard time at ending on Dragonshire without the objective, and it does do a lot to get them the objective, but it's just a challenging draft. It's going to create a very slow gameplay, and if the enemies had more level 20 power spike heroes, they would be in a much better spot. What I mean by that is if you know how to draft against Simplicity here, or at least if you know that they're going to do this draft, you know they're going to win with the objective. And so if you play heavier level 20 heroes, then you can force the enemies, you can force fights on your terms with stronger talents than they have. But as far as the early playstyle of this, you win a lot of the Dragon Knights because you can't really get Yrel off of the point. You can't get Junkrat off of the bottom point. And the Chromie, Brightwing, and Anubarak just go wherever they need to go, lead to kills, or stop people from getting any points. And they can move around the map with double globals if needed, or sorry, just single global, just because of the Brightwing, if needed. And that's basically it. Early game Yrel, you're going to be looking at creating leads for your team, pushing lanes out, letting them crash, and then roam to look for either potential double soaking, look for helping teams with cams, or look for some ganks for your team as well. And that is how you're going to approach the early game. The mid game is pretty similar, and the late game, the adaptations you'll make is learning what value you can get. Does your team have enough damage to lead to a tank kill if you end up pushing the tanks into your team? If they don't, you may just want to peel for your team and give them more time to do that DPS. In this case, he's causing top lane to crash and mid lane to crash. So he's creating a lead for his team, and he's in a position where if his team decides to fight, he can flank in and force that fight. If his team decides not to fight, then he's just in a position where he has vision on the enemies no matter where they want to go. When the enemies decide to leave, he goes down to bot lane to go grab that. He can't pop Unstoppable yet just because they were chain CCing him for a second there, but he got just a small window where the arrow from between Uther's stun and the arrow from Sylvanas, where he was able to pop that Unstoppable. And now they don't have enough CC to chain CC him anymore, and now he can just be really annoying. And he can lead to quite a bit, stunning the enemy team. He still has his ult, so he does end up popping his ult because one more Q auto would have killed him there from the Kerrigan. And he's got a fountain. He can rejoin the fight. He's healthy. The enemies are less healthy. I mean, they're getting back up there. And now that he's stealthed, he's actually going to go push out another lane really quick, forcing the enemies to react, or they're going to lose their keep. And most likely, they're just going to lose their keep. Once he sees that the enemies have decided to react first, he's going to use his W to get in a better position to stun the Rexar. Pops is unstoppable so he doesn't get stunned by the Misha, followed up by the Kerrigan, of course. And then he's going back top again. All he's going to try to do this game is create value. And you can see almost the entire game he's been doing that. He's been creating value. That was actually an interesting adjustment. There is... On smaller lanes, it's actually faster to channel your W than it is to mount up. So keep that in mind, that if you're on a smaller lane map, it's faster to use your W than to mount up. Like Tomb of the Spider Queen, you would actually double soak faster by channeling your W from lane to lane than you would be. Now, do you want to use your W on the wave first? If you angle it right, it doesn't hurt to use your W first. In that case, you used a trait E. That's actually one of the things that I really like about Yrel is if you are good at making adaptations like that, it's really fun to see like what you can change around. he pops Unstoppable there before getting hit by the stuns from the Uther. He doesn't have ult anymore, but he's already led to 1 kill for his team, and now he's doing what he can to distract the enemies. He will lose 1 person on his team here, but in that time, he's still jumping in, leading to several kills, and keeping the enemies forced in a fight that they don't want to be in by staying behind them and knocking them repeatedly into the team. Right there, again, kind of forced the Uther into a no-win situation, and he's following the Uther with his stun available, so when the Uther comes back to life, he can immediately stun the Uther and lead to a kill. And now they've staggered this death, they've led to several kills, they've gotten the Dragonite, and they can close out this game. This is because he's applied that pressure, forcing the enemies to try to react to too many different things, and making it to where his team can engage on their terms and the enemy couldn't engage. He's made adaptations to be a little bit more defensive, to appeal for his Chromie and Junkrat, to give them more opportunity to do DPS. So with all of those adaptations, you guys have learned how to play Yrel in the early game, and how the competitive players are utilizing her throughout the game is mainly her adaptability. Her bully nature, her adaptability are the reasons why Yrel is being picked in the professional scene. Thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.